The air conditioning unit hummed rhythmically in Senior Airman Roger Fortson's Fort Walton Beach apartment, fighting against the oppressive May heat that pressed against the windows. Roger moved methodically around his living room, arranging his military awards on the small shelf, tokens of 4 years of distinguished service. On his phone screen, Monica's smile beamed through their FaceTime call, her voice a comforting constant as he prepared for next week's deployment. I never imagined my final moments would be live-streamed to the woman I loved, or that my commitment to serve my country would end with 6 bullets in my chest, fired by someone sworn to protect and serve. The unexpected knock came at 6:43 p.m., 3 sharp raps that cut through their conversation. "Hold on," Roger told Monica, his brow furrowing. "Someone's at the door." The knocking intensified, transforming into pounding that rattled the frame. Roger's training kicked in, 4 years of military discipline replacing confusion with focused caution. He moved toward his service weapon, legally stored in its case. "Babe, something doesn't feel right," he whispered to Monica, his voice low but steady. "I'm just going to check who it is." With practiced movements, he retrieved his pistol, holding it pointed downward, exactly as military protocol demanded. The pounding became a thunderous assault against the door. "Roger? What's happening?" Monica's voice tightened with concern. The door crashed open before he could answer. Deputy Eddie Duran stood framed in the doorway, his uniform darkened with sweat patches, his hand already moving toward his holster. In the heartbeat that followed, several realities collided. Roger, a decorated airman standing in his own home. Duran, a deputy responding to a suspicious activity, call from a neighbor who'd reported seeing an armed black man through a window. And Monica, frozen in horror as she watched through the unblinking eye of the phone camera, no command to drop the weapon. No identification as law enforcement. No chance for explanation. The first shot punctured the stillness. The second followed. Instantly. The third, fourth, fifth, and sixth in such rapid succession, they became almost a single extended explosion of sound. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the apartment as Roger collapsed. His phone clattered to the floor, landing at an angle that gave Monica an unobstructed view of her boyfriend's body, blood seeping through his Air Force t-shirt. "Roger," her scream cut through the sudden silence, amplified by the phone's speaker. Only then did Deputy Duran notice the FaceTime call, the witness he couldn't control. He stepped back, hand trembling slightly as he reached for his radio. "Shots fired. Suspect down," he reported mechanically. "Send backup to Cedar Ridge Apartments, Building C." The next 43 minutes unfolded in slow motion, paramedics declaring Roger dead at the scene, Monica's desperate calls to anyone who might help. Deputy Duran seated in his patrol car, giving his statement, neighbors gathering in shocked clusters. And the first military police vehicle arriving from nearby Hurlburt Field, lights flashing against the gathering dusk. What none of them realized in those chaotic first hours, the Pentagon was already receiving notification. Protocol demanded immediate reporting when active-duty military personnel died under civilian jurisdiction. What wasn't protocol was the response brewing within military leadership, a response that would upend the power dynamic between civilian law enforcement and military command. That I've watched hundreds of these tragedies unfold across America. Black men and women cut down by those who should protect them. But this case was different. This wasn't just another victim. This was Senior Airman Roger Fortson, decorated combat veteran, son of Atlanta, and serviceman under the direct protection of the United States military. The system expected this story to follow a familiar pattern: administrative leave, internal investigation, probable exoneration. But they didn't account for 2 critical factors: Monica's unwavering testimony as an eyewitness, and the full might of the Pentagon preparing to defend one of their own. This is the story of how a single act of injustice became the catalyst for a showdown between America's most powerful institutions, and how the death of one black airman forced a reckoning that would change everything. The path to service. Roger Fortson's journey to the Air Force began in South Atlanta, where opportunity often seemed as distant as the stars he would later fly beneath. His mother, Elaine, worked double shifts as a hospital aide to keep their modest 2-bedroom apartment. His father, Marcus Sr., had served in Desert Storm before taking a job at the post office, his military bearing never quite fading even in Civilian clothes. The military saved my life. Marcus would tell his son during their Sunday morning breakfasts of grits and eggs. Gave me discipline when the streets were offering chaos. Roger absorbed these lessons with quiet intensity. While his classmates pursued basketball scholarships or trade school, Roger's eyes turned skyward. At 17, with his mother's reluctant signature, he enlisted in the Air Force, a decision that would carry him from Atlanta's concrete horizons to bases across 3 continents. Basic training at Lackland revealed a natural aptitude for structure. Roger's drill instructors noted his exceptional focus under pressure and inherent leadership qualities. He graduated near the top of his class and specialized in tactical security operations, a role that required both physical stamina and strategic thinking. His first deployment came quickly, 8 months in Iraq, where desert dust infiltrated. Everything and danger lurked in the mundane. Roger earned his first commendation there for maintaining security during a medical evacuation under sporadic gunfire. Fear doesn't disappear with training, he wrote to Monica during that deployment. You just learn to function alongside it, to make it your companion rather than your master. 2 subsequent tours followed, one in Syria and another at a classified location that he could never discuss, even with Monica. With each return, his shoulders carried more responsibility, his eyes held more wisdom, and his service record accumulated. More commendations. By his 4th year, Senior Airman Fortson had become what military leadership considered exemplary. Disciplined but compassionate, technically skilled yet emotionally intelligent. His commanding officers had already flagged him for early promotion, noting his exceptional capacity to de-escalate volatile situations and textbook adherence to use-of-force protocols. The cruel irony. The same man who could defuse tensions with insurgents carrying AK-47s would be given no chance to identify himself to a nervous deputy with a drawn weapon. 2 worlds colliding. Deputy Eddie Duran's history with the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office told a different story. Hired 5 years earlier after a brief stint with a private security firm, Duran's personnel file contained both commendations and concerns. 3 excessive force complaints had been filed against him, all involving Black or Hispanic subjects. All dismissed after internal review. His fellow deputies knew him as Eddie the Edge, a nickname that carried mixed connotations. Some appreciated his willingness to confront danger. Others worried about his hair-trigger responses to perceived threats. He's quick on the draw, one colleague had remarked during a performance review. Sometimes too quick. The department itself operated under mounting scrutiny. Okaloosa County, with its mix of military installations, tourist attractions, and economically struggling neighborhoods, presented complex policing challenges. Recent incidents involving military personnel had created tension between the sheriff's office and base commanders. A bar fight between Marines and deputies had made regional headlines. A disputed traffic stop involving an Army colonel's wife had prompted formal complaints. Sheriff Eric Aden, a politically savvy veteran with one eye on re-election, had instituted mandatory cultural sensitivity training the previous year, a program Duran had attended but, according to his instructor, participated in minimally. On the day of the shooting, Duran had already responded to 7 calls, including a domestic dispute and a shoplifting incident. The call about a suspicious armed individual at Cedar Ridge Apartments came near the end of his 12-hour shift, a detail his defense attorney would later emphasize repeatedly. What the attorney would mention less frequently, Duran's body camera, which department policy required for all interactions, was not activated until after the shots were fired. Military discipline versus street justice. Colonel Marcus Bell received the notification about Roger Fortson's death while reviewing deployment schedules in his office at Pentagon headquarters. A 30-year career officer with a law degree from Howard University, Bell had personally mentored dozens of young Black service members, helping them navigate both military hierarchy and America's complicated racial landscape. The initial report, active duty airman deceased following officer-involved shooting, contained few details, but something about the sparse information triggered Bell's instincts. He immediately requested full details and activated the Pentagon's Special Circumstances Response Team, a little-known unit designed to protect military interests in civilian jurisdictions. Get me everything, he instructed his aide. Body cam, witness statements, service record, and find out if we had any prior concerns about this jurisdiction. The information arrived in secure packets over the next 8 hours. With each new detail, Colonel Bell's expression hardened. The pattern was painfully familiar, but this time, the victim wore the uniform Bell had dedicated his life to serving. The contrast between Roger's firearms training and Duran's actions stood in stark relief. Air Force personnel underwent exhaustive protocols about weapon handling, clear verbal commands, escalation continuums, threat assessment matrices. Roger had passed every evaluation with perfect scores. Duran had fired 6 shots within 7 seconds of the door opening. No verbal identification as law enforcement. No commands to drop the weapon. No opportunity for Roger to identify himself as military personnel. Most damning, the angle of Roger's weapon, pointed downward, precisely as military protocol demanded when not actively engaged. He followed every rule we taught him, Colonel Bell told his assembled team at the Pentagon. And he died because Deputy Duran followed none of the rules his department should have enforced. The system's calculated response while the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office moved through familiar post-shooting procedures. Administrative leave for Duran, a carefully worded press release emphasizing ongoing investigation, social media posts, requesting patience from the community. The Pentagon was mobilizing with uncharacteristic speed. Sheriff Aiden's first indication that this case would deviate from the norm came at 7:30 a.m. the morning after the shooting. His administrative assistant interrupted his breakfast. "Sir, there's Colonel Bell from the Pentagon on line 1. He says it's regarding yesterday's incident, and he describes it as time-sensitive and non-negotiable." The 15-minute conversation that followed left the sheriff pale and shaken. Colonel Bell had outlined, in precise legal terms, the Pentagon's interest in the case, the multiple jurisdictional questions at play, and the military's intention to launch its own parallel investigation. "This isn't just another shooting, Sheriff," Bell concluded. "This is a matter of national security when our service members cannot feel safe in their own homes." The Secretary of Defense has taken personal interest. Across town, Monica Ellis woke in a hotel room secured by Air Force representatives who had arrived shortly after the shooting. An Air Force chaplain sat with her through the night, while a JAG officer explained the unique circumstances now surrounding Roger's death. "The military protects its own," the officer told her, "in ways civilian authorities often cannot." For 4 years, Monica had known Roger as gentle but resolute, a man whose strength came from discipline rather than aggression. Now she found herself thrust into a role she never anticipated. Key witness in a case that would challenge the boundaries between civilian policing and military authority. "He had his gun pointed down," she repeated to investigators, her voice gaining strength with each retelling. "He never raised it, never threatened. The deputy just started shooting." Her testimony, combined with the preserved FaceTime recording on her phone, provided what civilian prosecutors often lacked in police shooting cases: unimpeachable evidence from a credible witness. The pattern interrupted 3 days after the shooting. As dual investigations accelerated, a critical revelation emerged. Deputy Duran's dashboard camera had captured his approach to Roger's apartment, including a call he made before leaving his vehicle. "Got a call about an armed suspect," he told dispatch. "Probably nothing, just another paranoid resident seeing a black guy with a gun. I'll clear it up quickly." The casual dismissal, the presumption of innocence, and the racial framing collided in those 20 seconds of audio. More critically, the transmission contradicted Duran's post-shooting statement, where he claimed to have approached with heightened caution due to credible information about an armed and dangerous individual. This discrepancy cracked open the case, revealing not just procedural failures, but potential deliberate misrepresentation. For Colonel Bell and his team, it confirmed what military statistics had long suggested: proximity to bases didn't guarantee safety for service members of color. Instead, it often placed them at the intersection of two systems, military discipline and civilian policing, with fatally contradictory expectations. Studies commissioned by the Pentagon had documented the phenomenon. Black service members faced disproportionate civilian policing encounters near bases nationwide. Military training that emphasized weapon safety sometimes conflicted with civilian police expectations during high-stress encounters. The gap between these systems had claimed lives before, but never with such clear evidence, never with such high-level military attention. When we examine cases like Roger Fortson's, we must ask ourselves, how can we claim to honor those who serve while allowing systems to exist that fundamentally endanger them because of their race? How can we reconcile the discipline we demand from our military personnel with the fear-based reactions we excuse from those policing them? The military trains its personnel to respond with measured force and clear communication. Shouldn't we demand the same, or better, from those authorized to use deadly force in our communities? As Roger's case began its journey through justice systems, both military and civilian, these questions would demand answers that would reshape institutional relationships built over decades. The Pentagon was stepping into civilian justice in unprecedented ways, and the reverberations would extend far beyond one apartment in Fort Walton Beach. The moment truth shattered, the digital clock on Roger Fortson's nightstand read 6:43 p.m. when the first knock came. Security footage from the apartment complex would later confirm the timeline with clinical precision. 3 minutes and 17 seconds from Deputy Duran's arrival in the parking lot to the final echo of gunfire in Unit 237 at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement would eventually reconstruct those 197 seconds in exhaustive detail, a timeline that would become central to both criminal proceedings and military inquiry. Every action, reaction, and fatal decision cataloged and scrutinized. 6:40:43 p.m. Deputy Duran's cruiser enters Cedar Ridge Apartments south entrance. 6:41 and 12 seconds p.m. Dash camera records Duran's call to dispatch. 6:42 and 5 seconds p.m. Duran exits vehicle, adjusts his holster, approaches Building C. 6:42 and 38 seconds p.m. Surveillance camera captures Duran checking his weapon before climbing stairs. 6:43 and 2 seconds p.m. First knock on Roger's door. 6:43 and 28 seconds p.m. Second series of knocks, more forceful. 6:43 and 51 seconds p.m. Roger retrieves his service weapon from a secured case. 6:43 and 59 seconds p.m. Door forced open. 6:44 and 1 second p.m. First shot fired. 6:44 and 7 seconds p.m. Sixth and final shot fired. 6:44 and 9 seconds p.m. Monica's scream audible on FaceTime recording. Within those final 8 seconds, from door breach to last bullet, Roger Fortson's disciplined life transformed into a statistic. 6 hollow point rounds entered his body, 2 in the chest, 1 in the shoulder, 2 in the abdomen, 1 in the upper thigh. A grouping that firearms experts would later testify reflected practiced center mass targeting rather than panicked discharge. The FaceTime call captured sounds that ballistics experts would analyze for months. The distinct metallic click of Roger removing his weapon from its case, the wooden crack of the door frame splintering. The first shot's report, followed by the 5 subsequent rounds in rapid succession. Most critically, the audio contained no verbal warnings from Deputy Duran. No identification as law enforcement. No commands to drop the weapon. Just the crash of forced entry immediately followed by gunfire to Monica's phone, positioned on Roger's counter, recorded the aftermath with merciless clarity. Roger collapsing backward, his weapon still pointed downward, clattering to the floor unfired. His final exhale, wet with blood. Deputy Duran's ragged breathing as he entered the apartment, weapon still drawn, and Monica's voice, desperate and disbelieving. Roger, Roger, someone help him. Please, help him. Evidence and erasure. The crime scene processing began at 7:30 p.m. under protocols established for all officer-involved shootings in Okaloosa County. Detective Javier Mendez, lead investigator for the sheriff's office, arrived to find a scene already compromised by emergency medical response and multiple officers moving through the apartment. What should have been pristine evidence was already muddled. Shell casings had been kicked aside by paramedics. Blood spatter patterns disrupted by medical equipment. The initial positioning of Roger's weapon, critical to determining threat assessment, documented only through Monica's video rather than physical evidence. We've got 6 casings from the deputy's weapon, Detective Mendez noted into his recorder. No discharge from the victim's firearm. Gunshot residue testing being conducted on both the deceased and Deputy Duran. As Mendez processed the physical evidence, digital investigations specialist Dana Washington began extracting data from surveillance systems, body cameras, and communication logs. Her findings would ultimately shatter the official narrative before it could solidify. Deputy Duran's body camera was activated at 6:44 and 23 seconds p.m., she noted in her preliminary report, approximately 16 seconds after the final shot was fired. This 16-second gap between the shooting and camera activation represented a critical violation of department policy requiring continuous recording during all civilian interactions. The missing footage created an evidentiary void that Monica's FaceTime recording would partially fill. More troubling discoveries followed. Deputy Duran's verbal report to first responders described Roger as advancing with weapon raised and claimed he had announced police presence multiple times before discharge. Both statements directly contradicted the audio and visual evidence from Monica's phone. The most damning discrepancy emerged when investigators compared Duran's written statement with dispatch recordings. In his official account, Duran described responding to reports of an armed individual threatening residents. Yet dispatch logs showed the call classified merely as suspicious person, possibly armed. No threats reported. This escalation of perceived threat between dispatch and report suggested a narrative being constructed after the fact, a justification being built on a foundation of fabrication. Two systems collide while county officials processed the immediate crime scene. Military authorities moved with unprecedented speed. By 8:15 p.m., less than 2 hours after the shooting, Air Force Office of Special Investigations agents arrived at Cedar Ridge Apartments, asserting jurisdiction under military protocols regarding active duty casualties. The confrontation between systems began immediately. Sheriff's deputies, accustomed to controlling crime scenes within their jurisdiction, found themselves facing military investigators with separate authority and a distinct chain of command. "We're not leaving," Detective OSI Agent Kimberly Chun informed Mendez when he questioned their presence. Senior Airman Fortson was an active-duty Air Force. His death triggers concurrent jurisdiction under Section 1257 of the Military Code. This assertion of military authority represented the first public indication that Roger's case would deviate from standard procedure. Behind this initial team stood the full weight of Pentagon authority, a force already mobilizing under Colonel Bell's direction. Within 24 hours, military investigators had secured Roger's complete service record, including firearms qualifications, performance evaluations documenting his exceptional compliance with use of force protocols, medical examiner access for an independent military autopsy, Monica's full statement, and preservation of the FaceTime recording temporary security detail for Monica and Roger's family. Most significantly, they obtained a judicial order preventing destruction or altering of any evidence, including Deputy Duran's personnel files, disciplinary records, and previous use of force incidents. This aggressive evidence preservation strategy revealed the Pentagon's approach. They were preparing for both criminal proceedings and potential civil rights litigation with methodical precision. The community awakens. News of Roger's death spread through multiple channels simultaneously. Social media erupted with grainy cell phone footage of emergency vehicles outside Cedar Ridge Apartments. Local news led with officer-involved shooting leaves military members dead. Military networks buzzed with alerts through unofficial channels. Before official notifications could be completed, by morning, 3 distinct communities had mobilized. Military personnel from Hurlburt Field gathered in silent formation outside the base gates, hundreds of service members standing at attention, in civilian clothes, observing military discipline while making their presence undeniably visible. Civil rights activists from across Florida converged on Fort Walton Beach, led by organizations that had documented patterns of excessive force against minorities in the region. Their chants of "service didn't save him" echoed through downtown streets. Military families, spanning racial and political divides, united in unprecedented solidarity. Spouses, children, and parents of active duty personnel created a human chain around the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office, their silent presence more powerful than any shouted slogan. What made this coalition particularly potent was its composition. These weren't just traditional anti-police brutality protesters. These were military families, veterans, active duty personnel, constituencies typically aligned with law enforcement. Their presence transformed the narrative from yet another police shooting into something more complex, a fundamental breach of the social contract between those who serve in uniform, whether military or police. Colonel Aaron Matthews, commander of Hurlburt Field's security forces, addressed his personnel with barely contained fury during morning briefing. One of our airmen was executed in his own home yesterday. He followed every protocol we taught him. He maintained weapon discipline even as his door was being broken down, and he was killed for it. This isn't just a tragedy. It's a complete failure of the systems meant to protect all citizens, including those who wear our uniform. Sheriff Aiden, recognizing the rapidly deteriorating community relations, attempted damage control through a hastily organized press conference. His carefully worded statement emphasized ongoing investigation and commitment to transparency, while avoiding specific comments about Deputy Duran's actions. We are working closely with military authorities to determine exactly what happened in this tragic incident, he told assembled reporters. Deputy Duran has been placed on administrative leave pending full investigation, which is standard procedure. The sheriff's measured tone contrasted sharply with the raw emotion displayed at a vigil held that evening near Roger's apartment. Monica Ellis, supported by Air Force Chaplain Captain Michael Okonkwo, addressed hundreds of mourners with quiet dignity that only amplified her devastating account. They took a man who defended this country, she said, her voice steady despite tears streaming down her face. A man who knew more about weapon safety and proper protocols than the officer who killed him. They took him from me, from his family, from his country, and they did it without a single warning, without a single chance for him to identify himself. Her testimony, delivered with the precision Roger had always admired in her graduate school presentations, cut through official narratives and technical terminology. She spoke not of officer-involved incidents, but of a man she loved being gunned down while following every rule he'd been taught. The cliffhanger, damning discovery 7 days after the shooting, as parallel investigations accelerated and community tensions intensified. Digital specialist Washington made a discovery that would transform the case from troubling to potentially criminal. While reviewing Deputy Duran's text messages, obtained under military court order despite sheriff's office objections, she found an exchange from 3 weeks before the shooting. The conversation between Duran and another deputy referenced Cedar Ridge Apartments and its proximity to the military base. Deputy Harris, those military guys in Cedar Ridge think their uniform makes them special. All attitudes when we respond to calls there. Duran, don't worry about them. They learn quickly who's really in charge once they're off base, especially the ones who think being military cancels out being black. This explicit linking of race and military status, combined with Duran's dismissive approach to jurisdiction, suggested more than momentary poor judgment. It pointed toward premeditated bias, a mindset that viewed black service members as deserving of particular scrutiny despite their military status. When Washington brought this evidence to the Joint Investigation Team, the atmosphere in the room transformed. What had been a tragic case of procedural failure suddenly carried the weight of potentially deliberate targeting. Colonel Bell, receiving the information via secure communication, immediately contacted the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. The Pentagon wasn't just seeking justice for one airman anymore. They were exposing a pattern that potentially endangered every service member of color. The text messages revealed something the military had long suspected but rarely proven. 4. Some in law enforcement, a uniform didn't provide protection when worn by black bodies. It sometimes made them targets. This revelation would set the stage for unprecedented military intervention in civilian law enforcement, a power reversal that would send shockwaves through both systems and forever alter the relationship between those who serve in different uniforms. The Pentagon mobilizes. The Pentagon's response to Roger Fortson's death began as a ripple and swelled into a tsunami. What started with OSI agents at a crime scene transformed into Operation Fortitude, an unprecedented military intervention into civilian law enforcement. 72 hours after the shooting, Secretary of Defense Eleanor Mitchell convened an emergency meeting in the Pentagon's secure conference room B-307. Around the polished oak table sat Joint Chiefs representatives, Judge Advocate General senior leadership, congressional liaisons, and civil rights attorneys with military backgrounds. "We are facing a critical moment," Secretary Mitchell began, her voice measured but resolute. Senior Airman Fortson's death represents more than an individual tragedy. It exposes a systemic vulnerability for military personnel of color when they leave our bases and enter civilian jurisdictions. The evidence presented painted a devastating picture. Roger's impeccable service record, the forensic timeline showing no opportunity for him to surrender, Monica's testimony and video evidence. And most damning, Deputy Duran's text messages revealing targeted bias against Black military personnel. "This case provides what we've rarely had before," Colonel Bell explained as he walked the group through digital evidence. "Incontrovertible, proof of both procedural failure and prejudicial intent." The question now becomes, how do we respond in a way that honors Airman Fortson while creating lasting change? The answer materialized as a multi-pronged strategy that would leverage military authority in unprecedented ways. First, the Department of Defense filed a formal notice asserting concurrent jurisdiction under the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act, effectively inserting military oversight into every aspect of the investigation and potential prosecution. Second, JAG officers prepared to assist local prosecutors while simultaneously building a separate federal civil rights case, creating two parallel tracks for accountability. Third, military intelligence analysts began examining 5 years of incident reports involving service members in Okaloosa County, searching for patterns that might indicate systemic discrimination. Fourth, and most controversially, Secretary Mitchell authorized deployment of military police training teams to review and assess civilian law enforcement practices near major installations nationwide, a direct insertion of military oversight into civilian policing that would have been unthinkable before Roger's death. "We're not just seeking justice for one airman," Secretary Mitchell concluded. "We're establishing that the Pentagon will protect its personnel both on and off the battlefield. When those sworn to protect fail in that duty because of bias, we will intervene with every tool at our disposal." The authority confrontation Sheriff Eric Aden received the Pentagon's notification while handling another crisis. Protests outside his department headquarters had grown to over 5,000 people, including military families from bases across 3 states. The document's cold legal language masked its revolutionary implications. Under authority granted by U.S. Code Title 10 and the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act, the Department of Defense hereby establishes joint investigative authority in the matter of Senior Airman Roger Fortson, deceased, and asserts protective interest in all related proceedings. Translation: the Pentagon was stepping directly into his jurisdiction. Hours later, Sheriff Aden sat across from Major General Dana Williams in the Okaloosa County Administration Building, flanked by county attorneys clearly outmatched by the military's legal team. "This is unprecedented overreach," County Attorney James Hargrove protested, sweat beading along his hairline. "Civilian law enforcement has clear jurisdiction in this matter." General Williams remained composed, her combat deployment ribbons visible beneath her immaculate uniform. "Mr. Hargrove, we're not disputing your jurisdiction. We're supplementing it." Senior Airman Fortson was under oath to the United States government. His death occurred while he maintained perfect compliance with military protocols. The Department of Defense has both the authority and the obligation to ensure proper investigation and accountability. The subsequent negotiation established procedures that fundamentally altered the power dynamic. Military observers would be present during all investigative activities, including witness interviews and evidence processing. All personnel files for Deputy Duran and responding officers would be provided to military investigators. JAG officers would review charging decisions before finalization. Military experts would be permitted to testify regarding firearms protocols and training. Most significantly, the Pentagon secured agreement that military personnel would receive revised interaction protocols from all law enforcement agencies operating near bases, a concession that extended far beyond Roger's case to address systemic vulnerabilities. Sheriff Aden, recognizing both legal reality and public relations necessity, attempted to frame the arrangement positively during a subsequent press conference. "We welcome collaboration with our military partners," he stated. tension visible in his jaw despite the diplomatic words. The sheriff's office has always maintained strong relationships with nearby bases, and this joint approach will ensure complete transparency. What he didn't mention, the Pentagon had effectively established oversight of his department, creating a precedent that would reshape civilian-military boundaries nationwide. Monica becomes the voice while institutional forces collided. Monica Ellis emerged as the human center of the case, her role transforming from grieving girlfriend to powerful advocate through circumstances she never would have chosen. The military recognized her unique position immediately. Unlike many police shooting cases where victim credibility could be questioned or background scrutinized, Monica presented an unassailable witness. Educated, articulate, present for the entire incident via technology, and connected to a victim whose service record was exemplary. Air Force Judge Advocate Captain Layla Washington was assigned as Monica's military liaison, a position typically reserved for family members of deceased service members, but extended to her given her status as primary witness and Roger's intended fiancée. "They need your voice," Captain Washington explained during their first meeting in a secured hotel room provided by the Air Force. "Your testimony carries weight that statistics and legal arguments never could." Monica's graduate studies in communications had prepared her to analyze rhetoric and media framing. Now she applied those skills to ensure Roger's story couldn't be distorted or diminished. Her first major public statement came during a Pentagon press briefing, an unprecedented forum for a civilian witness. Wearing a blue dress Roger had given her for her birthday, Monica addressed senior military leadership and national media with composed precision. Roger Fortson followed every rule. She began, her voice steady despite the cameras. He maintained weapon discipline exactly as the Air Force trained him. He kept his service weapon pointed downward, even as his door was broken open without warning. He never received a single command, never had a chance to identify himself as military personnel. He was killed not because of any threat he posed, but because Deputy Duran made assumptions based on his race that overrode all proper procedure. Her testimony, combined with still images from her FaceTime recording, provided what abstract arguments about systemic racism often couldn't. Visceral evidence of injustice that transcended political divides. Conservative media outlets that typically defended law enforcement found themselves unable to contradict the clear evidence or question the character of an Air Force serviceman killed in his own home. Military families, a constituency that had often remained quiet during previous police shooting controversies, mobilized across political lines. Monica channeled this growing coalition with strategic precision, working with Captain Washington to frame Roger's case within military values rather than partisan politics. "This isn't about being anti-police," she explained during a meeting with congressional representatives. "It's about holding all uniformed personnel to the high standards that Roger himself lived by. It's about ensuring that those who serve their country receive the same protection they provide to others." This framing created unprecedented alliances. Conservative military supporters finding common cause with civil rights activists, all united around the principle that those who serve in uniform deserve protection regardless of race. The system faces itself 14 days after the shooting. The institutional confrontation reached its climax in a closed-door meeting at the Department of Justice. Attorney General Victor Ramirez mediated between Pentagon representatives and Florida state authorities, searching for a resolution that acknowledged both civilian jurisdiction and military interests. The military's position, presented by Colonel Bell, was uncompromising. The Department of Defense cannot allow a precedent where service members of color face heightened danger from the very civilian authorities meant to protect them. This case demands both individual accountability and systemic reform. State prosecutors, recognizing the overwhelming evidence and unprecedented military pressure, offered a potential resolution. Deputy Duran would face charges of second-degree murder rather than the more typical manslaughter charges often seen in police shooting cases. This elevation in charges represented a significant concession, an acknowledgement that Duran's actions constituted knowing disregard for human life, rather than mere negligence. The text messages revealing bias would be admissible as evidence of motive and intent. More systemically, Florida agreed to implement military personnel interaction protocols for all law enforcement agencies operating near installations, standardized. Procedures requiring verbal identification, clear commands, and recognition of military weapons training. These concessions, while substantial, didn't fully satisfy Pentagon leadership. They pushed for additional federal civil rights charges, a second track of accountability that would establish national precedent rather than state-specific outcomes. After hours of negotiation, Attorney General Ramirez announced his decision. The Department of Justice will pursue federal civil rights charges concurrently with state murder prosecution. The evidence indicates not just procedural failure, but targeted discrimination against a service member based on race, a violation that demands federal response. This dual-track prosecution strategy, state murder charges and federal civil rights charges, represented a seismic shift in how police shootings involving military personnel would be handled. It established that those who serve face not just local accountability, but federal protection when bias motivates violence against them. The Brotherhood reflects as legal machinery advanced. Colonel Marcus Bell found himself addressing 300 Black service members at the Pentagon's annual leadership symposium. The room fell silent as he stepped to the podium, the weight of Rogers' case visible in his usually stoic expression. Throughout my 30 years of service, he began, I've told young Black men and women that the uniform provides protection, that excellence in service transcends race. Roger Fortson embodied that excellence. He followed every protocol. He maintained perfect discipline, and it did not save him. Bell paused, allowing the harsh truth to resonate through the silent room. But his death has forced a reckoning that generations of less visible injustice could not. The Pentagon has now acknowledged what many of us have always known, that our uniform doesn't automatically shield us from the biases that plague American society. He gestured toward the back of the room, where Monica sat alongside Roger's parents. Because of their courage and because of irrefutable evidence, military leadership has finally committed institutional power to addressing what individual service members have faced alone. This represents both profound tragedy and potential transformation. Bell's voice lowered, becoming more personal than his typical official presentations. I've served this country for 3 decades, believing in its capacity to change. I've watched progress come in painful increments, often paid for with blood. Roger's sacrifice, unwilling and unjust as it was, has created a moment where military authority stands firmly against biased policing in ways previously unimaginable. He straightened, returning to his commander's bearing. Our obligation now is to ensure this moment becomes a movement, that Roger's death leads to lasting protection for every service member regardless of race. That when they leave our bases, they enter communities where their training is respected, their discipline recognized, and their lives valued. The speech circulated widely through military channels, crystallizing the institutional commitment that had emerged from individual tragedy. What began as one airman's death had catalyzed a fundamental reassessment of how military authority intersects with civilian law enforcement, a reassessment that would reshape both systems in ways that would honor Roger Fortson's memory through structural change rather than mere symbolic gestures. The Okaloosa County Courthouse stood imposing against clear Florida skies as Deputy Eddie Duran's trial began, exactly 97 days after Roger Fortson's death. Security measures transformed the building into a fortress, National Guard units supplemented local law enforcement, barricades separated opposing demonstrators, and military personnel in civilian clothes maintained silent vigil around the perimeter. Inside Courtroom 3, State Prosecutor Amanda Liu faced a daunting challenge. Police shooting cases historically ended in acquittals or hung juries. But the unique circumstances of Roger's death, military status, impeccable record, and most crucially, Monica's video evidence, created unprecedented advantages for prosecution. This case isn't about challenging law enforcement's difficult job, Liu told jurors during opening statements. It's about holding one individual accountable for actions that violated both police procedure and basic human rights. Deputy Duran didn't just fail to follow protocol. He made calculated decisions that directly caused the death of Senior Airman Roger Fortson. Defense attorney Martin Geller countered with the standard police shooting defense. split-second decisions. Perceived threat, officer safety. But these arguments collapsed against the precise timeline established by military forensic analysts. 6 seconds, Liu reminded jurors repeatedly. From door breach to final shot, 6 seconds. No commands, no warnings, no chance for compliance. The prosecution's case methodically dismantled every aspect of Duran's defense. Military firearms instructor Master Sergeant Devin Taylor explained Rogers' weapon positioning. Airman Fortson maintained textbook low-ready position, exactly as trained. His finger wasn't even on the trigger when he was shot. Digital forensic expert Dr. Leanne Woods authenticated Monica's FaceTime recording. The continuous video shows Airman Fortson never raised his weapon, never took aggressive action, and received no verbal commands before being shot. Most devastating was Rogers' final training evaluation, completed just 2 weeks before his death. His instructor had written, exceptional discipline during high-stress simulation, maintained perfect trigger discipline and verbal de-escalation even when faced with surprise scenarios. This evaluation directly contradicted the defense's claim that Roger might have acted aggressively. He had literally been tested on similar scenarios and demonstrated perfect restraint. The prosecution's final witness was Monica Ellis. Dressed in crisp navy blue, she walked to the stand with military-like precision, a bearing she'd absorbed from Roger during their years together. For 78 minutes, she guided jurors through every second of what she witnessed, her academic background evident in her methodical presentation. I watched the man I loved die because he wasn't given a chance, she concluded. He followed every rule, maintained every protocol, and still wasn't afforded the basic dignity of a warning before his life was taken. The defense case crumbled further when Duran took the stand. Under Liu's cross-examination, contradictions emerged between his testimony, written report, and body camera footage activated after the shooting. His explanation for the 16-second delay in activating his camera, "I was focused on scene safety," collapsed when Liu presented evidence that he had texted his supervisor before activating the required recording device. Most damaging was his inability to explain the text messages expressing bias against black military personnel. His stammered response, "That was just talk, not how I actually feel," visibly alienated multiple jurors. After 7 days of testimony, the jury received the case. Their deliberation lasted just 4 hours and 22 minutes. The verdict, guilty of second-degree murder, sent shockwaves through police departments nationwide. The sentence, 25 years without parole, established a new precedent for accountability in law enforcement killings. But the state prosecution represented only half the justice equation. The federal civil rights case remained, its focus, broader than individual accountability, beyond one badge. Institutional reckoning. While state proceedings targeted Duran's individual actions, federal prosecutors pursued systemic accountability. Their case, United States versus Duran and Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office, sought to establish pattern and practice violations, proving Rogers' death resulted from institutional failures rather than isolated misconduct. The federal courthouse in Tallahassee became the battleground for this broader confrontation, with Department of Justice attorneys presenting evidence of systemic problems. 5 years of excessive force complaints showing black subjects 8 times more likely to experience weapon-drawn encounters, training records revealing minimal de-escalation. Instruction compared to firearms training, internal communications showing dismissed concerns about bias from within the department, statistical analysis of cross-jurisdictional disparities in use of force incidents near military installations. This institutional focus transformed the case from individual tragedy to landmark precedent. The subsequent settlement agreement created legally binding reforms that extended far beyond Okaloosa County. Mandatory military liaison officers within departments near installations required training on military weapons protocols and identification procedures, specialized response protocols for addresses registered to service members, independent review boards, including military representatives for use of force incidents involving military personnel, body camera requirements with automatic activation. Upon approaching registered military housing, these reforms, backed by federal court enforcement, created a new framework for civilian military jurisdictional boundaries. one that recognized the unique vulnerability of service members of color when they leave base protection. Pentagon leadership, once criticized for remaining silent on racial justice issues, now leveraged institutional power to protect personnel regardless of political sensitivities. This shift represented more than policy adjustment. It signaled fundamental realignment of how military authority engaged with civilian institutions on matters of racial equity. 1 year after Rogers' death, the changes sparked by his case had transcended initial reforms. What began as tragedy evolved into transformation through 3 key developments. First, Congress passed the Fortson Military Protection Act, establishing federal standards for law enforcement interactions with service members. The legislation created specialized training requirements, jurisdictional guidelines, and accountability mechanisms for civilian agencies operating near military installations. Second, the Pentagon established the Service Member Civil Rights Division, a dedicated unit within JAG focused exclusively on protecting military personnel from discrimination in civilian contexts. This institutional commitment ensured Rogers' case would become foundation rather than exception. Third, military recruitment materials now included explicit assurances about protection beyond base boundaries, a recognition that safety concerns influenced enlistment decisions among communities of color. This practical acknowledgement replaced vague promises with concrete protections. Monica Ellis played crucial roles in each development. Her testimony before congressional committees brought human impact to policy discussions. Her consultations with Pentagon leadership ensured reforms addressed practical realities rather than abstract principles. Her ongoing dialogue with military families maintained accountability when media attention inevitably faded. During the Fortson Act signing ceremony, President Gabriel Martinez acknowledged this multifaceted impact. Roger Fortson's death revealed a gap in our protection of those who protect us. Today, we close that gap not with symbolic gestures, but with structural change. When someone swears an oath to defend this nation, we owe them more than gratitude. We owe them protection regardless of their race or background. The president's words reflected a critical evolution. Rogers' case had transcended the typical cycle of outrage, promises, and gradual forgetfulness. Instead, it established durable institutional change through legal mechanisms, resource allocation, and cross-jurisdictional accountability. On the anniversary of Rogers' death, Monica visited his grave at Arlington National Cemetery. The military honors he received posthumously, including promotion to staff sergeant, provided formal recognition but couldn't fill the personal void his absence created. She placed fresh flowers beside his headstone. Monica reflected on the dual nature of his legacy, profound personal loss alongside meaningful institutional progress. The hardest part, she later told military family advocates, is that Roger would have been exactly the kind of leader these reforms were designed to develop. He believed deeply in making systems better rather than just criticizing their failures. This recognition, that change came at irreplaceable personal cost, infused the movement with both urgency and humility. The reforms weren't abstract policy improvements, but vital protections for real lives, each irreplaceable in their individual humanity. Rogers' parents established a scholarship for Black ROTC candidates, focusing on military justice and civil rights law, creating pathways for future leaders who might bridge divides Roger himself had navigated with such discipline and grace. Military leadership integrated his case into training curricula, ensuring future generations would understand both the tragedy of his death and the transformation it catalyzed. Rather than becoming a faceless martyr, Roger remained present through the specific protocols and protections his story inspired. During the dedication of the Military Civil Rights Division headquarters, Colonel Bell captured this complex legacy. Progress in America has always carried an unjust cost, paid disproportionately by those with the least obligation to bear it. Staff Sergeant Fortson paid that cost without consent or choice. Our responsibility is to ensure his sacrifice creates protection that prevents others from facing similar injustice. True honor lies not in memorials, but in creating systems that would have saved his life. This commitment to substantive rather than symbolic change distinguished the movement Rogers' death inspired. While many cases sparked temporary outrage before fading from public consciousness, the institutional reforms following his death created accountability mechanisms that functioned regardless of attention cycles or political climates. The final measure of this impact came not through headlines or speeches, but through the quiet safety of service members who would never know how close they came to similar fates, protected by reforms that transformed vulnerability into security, transforming breach of trust into foundations for justice.